Welcome everyone. You're in the right place for our BIM learning session featuring clash detection with Revit and Navisworks with your presenter, Nicholas Boley. Nicholas, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Jenna. So we have a lot to cover, so I won't spend too much time on the intro, but I have 12 years of experience as a mechanical designer before coming to ImagineIt, and then I've been with ImagineIt for 3 years now. So what we're going to talk about today is clash detection in both Navisworks and Revit. I'll probably start with Revit just because it's going to go a little bit faster. And then when we jump to Navisworks, I'll talk a little bit about the interface and then some tips for navigating and just working your way through that. A couple things to compare versus Navisworks versus Revit is that in Revit you're clashing categories or selections and categories against other files possibly that are linked into your model. You can navigate 3D views to find clashes, and you're in your native software that you designed in, so those are the few advantages. And we can also export a report. The only thing missing on the report side in Revit is that tracking and that live tracking to see what's changed since the last time you ran the report. In Navisworks, we're clashing against basically the same categories and selections. We can also navigate in 3D views. In Navisworks, we can clash against space and time. So if you have some kind of timelining and phasing, we can actually do clash detection against that. We can move from Navisworks to our native softwares. In this case, the native software will be Revit. And similarly to Revit, we can have colors assigned to systems. So I know sometimes people don't like that they can't see the colors that they see in Revit. Especially on the MEP side, it's sometimes challenging. When you come into Revit or Navisworks, everything turns gray. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But a couple of the great things about Navisworks is that we can create rules and sets and searches, and then we can leverage and reuse those searches to generate our clash reports. And our reports are live, and they're continually being updated, and we can send those reports to other consultants. So there's a couple advantages to Navisworks that we'll get into. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time in PowerPoint. I mostly just made it just as a backup in case I had some software issues, so I'm going to hop out of there. And we'll get started inside the Revit software. All right. So while I might be using MEP and plumbing as my primary examples, that's not to say anything I talk about can't be used against architectural or structural. And I will be talking about structural as well. So the easiest thing to do when working in Navisworks is when you're working is to highlight an area of work and then first make a 3D view of that area. And that allows you to simply see what you're working in. And I really enjoy this view. It took me several years to start using views like this on the MEP side. I was always like, we don't care about pretty pictures, but these are really fantastic for coordination. And before I started using views like this, I was cutting thousands of sections. So before running clash detection, you can do a lot of clash avoiding using views like this. And then when you're resolving your clashes, these are fantastic views to refer back to. So I got to this view by doing a selection. And then I hit the quick selection box button up here, and the shortcut for that is BX, and that's how I got to that view. And that tool is new to 2016. So what I like to do when I run a clash report is I like to have a couple of views open. More specifically, the views where I expect the clashes to show up. And again, I'm just going to keep the 3D view open. So having the 3D view open, I'm going to highlight my sanitary piping, which I want to do my clash report against. I prefer doing a selection, and maybe I'll do the sanitary piping, or maybe I'll just select this entire area of the building, and we can extend these areas a little bit. But I prefer to do selections versus running like all piping in the entire project against all structural. It's just too much to look at. So I'm doing a selection in this case, and now I'm going to go to Collaborate, Interference Check, and then Run Interference Check. So here on the left, I have my current selection, and if I hadn't selected anything, current selection would not be available. And then on the right, I'm going to pick from one of my links. So I'm mostly interested in how this piping interacts with the structure. So I'm going to choose the structural link in this example, and then I'll choose structural framing and columns, or I could just choose framing. But these are the categories that are in that model. And if I were to go to the architectural model, I could choose from a lot more categories such as walls, maybe ceilings, and even architectural columns. But in this case, we'll do structural. Once I select those categories in each file or of the selection, I'm just going to simply hit OK. And then what you can do is you can click on the grouping of the clashes and then hit show. And I wonder if it's showing up behind my report. There they are. And when you hit show, it'll center that selection on your screen there. It was falling behind the report, which is why I couldn't see it at first. So you'll see the beam is highlighted in pink, and then the pipe is highlighted in orange, and that's not unlike what Navisworks will do for you. The only thing we're missing here is the transparency of everything else. But when you have these plenum views set up, typically you'll be able to see what you're looking at pretty well. So again, I can select that, hit show, and I can see what's been highlighted. And then you can also expand it and then just hit one of the items and hit show, and it'll take you to that item. So once you hit show, you can either fix the clash or maybe go back to a plan view and then do some rerouting in plan view, depending on what your preference is. On top of that, I typically like to export my clashes to report. Now this is kind of a minimal clash list. Obviously, you're going to have a lot more than that in your models, on a bad day possibly. But let's go ahead and export this. So I'm going to hit the export button down here at the bottom. And then typically what I'll do is I'll create a clash reports folder under my project directory. And then I'm going to name this, level 1, area A, sanitary first structure. Just enough description that it's intuitive for somebody else who's going to come in after me to find out when I ran that clash report. Maybe I'll add the date. And I actually already did this, so I'm going to add some other digits in there to resolve a conflict. And then, so what that did was that saved down an HTML file. Once I've done that, I'm going to close this window. And then what I like to do is I like to open up Excel. And then open that file up. So I'm going to browse to my project directory. And make sure you're looking for all files, not just Excel files. Otherwise, you might not see what you're looking for. And there's that HTML file, and I'll hit open. And then here's the interference report. At this point, I'm going to save it back out. I prefer Excel native files. So I'm going to save it as an XLSX file. But at this point, what I actually like to do is I like to pretend this is a Navisworks report. So I'm going to create some tracking information, such as status, assigned to, and maybe another column for comments. So Navisworks does a better job with this, but we do have some ability to do that kind of tracking as well. The only downside is the status you're going to be manually keeping track of, and you can't really rerun the same report. I think I could probably do it, eliminating duplicates from Excel files, but you're not really going to be able to rerun the report and have these statuses update automatically. So you're really doing all this manually. Or maybe I'd put in a company name to run the clash, to resolve the clash. And so my comment might be move pipe down to 11 feet, 8 inches. And since I already saw that it's the same pipe throughout, it's probably the same comment for all of them. I just wanted to put in the comments while I was in here, but realistically, you're going to have to go find the clash first, and then you put the comment in. And to find the clash, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for this element ID number. So every element in Revit has an ID, so it says ID and then a number. So I just did copy to clipboard, Control-C, and then I go back to Revit, and then I'm going to go to the Manage ribbon and hit the Select by ID button under the Inquiry panel, all the way on the right there. And then I can paste the element ID and hit Show, and then it takes me to that element. And then I might figure out what the resolution is. Or if I'm the one that's actually going to fix the clash, then I'll just go ahead and fix it while I'm here. Now, of course, sanitary pipes are a little harder to fix than most, but at this point, I can just, adjust the elevation, and hopefully I don't create more clashes. And then I'll go and look in this 3D view to see if I've created any new clashes. I don't want to solve one problem and create another problem. When navigating the 3D view, it's helpful to click on an object when you're orbiting. And I'm just using Shift and Pan, or the Shift and pressing the mouse wheel to orbit. But again, I'm just using this view to confirm I resolved all the clashes and I didn't create any new ones. So in a nutshell, that's clash detection inside of Revit. And again, I had the trick of opening the HTML file in Excel to kind of create a port that's similar to what I could do inside of Navisworks. The main thing that's missing here is that I don't really have any pictures or anything to send somebody along with this. But we do have the element IDs, which is for a Revit user, that's all you might need. Now let's move over to Navisworks. Okay, so this isn't an intro to Navisworks class, so I may not go to as much detail as somebody might need who's maybe never used Navisworks before. But basically, I've appended my Revit model into Navisworks. I had a view created for the entire building. And then for the view properties, I actually like to set it to shaded, and I make sure my lighting's turned on. Setting it to shaded allows me to assign colors to different items. And so we'll go ahead and do that. And let's unpin the Clash Detective Wizard. So on the MEP side, or on the structural side, I want to see those items with a color. So in the Home Ribbon in Navisworks, I can hit the Appearance Profiler, and I can create rules that can assign almost all the same colors that you might see inside of Revit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on an object. So in this case, I'm clicking on a duct. And I'm going to look at the properties of that duct. So on the properties, I see the category is element in this element tab. And my system classification is return error. I can actually right-click on that and copy row. But I'm going to type in element, system classification, return error as my rule. So it's element. The property is system classification. And it's return error. And maybe I'll make that, maybe I'll make it green. I test the selection, I can see it all turn green, turn blue, and then I'm going to add it, and I'm going to run that, and now all my ductwork is green. Or maybe let's do another one. Let's do one for structural. Let's do one for each discipline, each primary discipline. So clicking on a beam, it's element, category, structural framing. Let's go in here, element, category, and then the property is structural framing, and let's go ahead and turn structural framing orange. And now the structural framing is orange. And I can do a similar rule for interior walls, and other MEP systems. So I just wanted to introduce you to those rules. So what you do is you click on an object, investigate the properties. So here's an interior wall. And then you take the properties that you find there, and then you apply those properties to the appearance profile to set colors. And you can really standardize how that's set up. So I want to start with that, and now let's go to the find items. So what I want to do now is I want to create selection sets very similar to what I just showed you. So let's do it for the sanitary piping. So looking at the sanitary piping, it's element, and then system classification is sanitary. So I'm going to do find items, and I'm going to do element, make these columns a little wider. The element property will be system classification. I can make that wider. Equals, and then I can hit this drop down and I can just pick sanitary. And I'm going to run that against all files. I mean, I know it's only in the MEP file, but maybe you had more than one MEP file, or maybe you had more than one architectural file that you're running against. And another thing I can do is I can actually isolate the level. So I can say, hey, you know what, let's do all sanitary piping on reference level. And let's see, equals, see how I did best. Yeah, reference level name equals 1, And let's see if it finds those. I don't care about casing, but it should work. Okay, so I can see it found the piping in blue. And so I like the rule. So it already selected the items. And now what I'm going to do is go to the Sets palette. And I'm going to hit the binoculars, Save Search Set. Excuse me. I'm going to type in level 1, or maybe I'll type in piping first sanitary. The really fantastic thing about using search sets is that when you get updated files, this search set will automatically find new elements. So I'm not manually selecting anything. And you can also templatize that. So if you have search sets in Navisworks template, when you start a new project and start appending these links, those search sets will still work for these new appended links. So I really like search sets. So I did something similar. I said element system class equals sanitary, or I could have done element category equals structural framing, or I could have done element function equals interior or not interior to filter out exterior walls or interior walls. So I created a search set. So I just wanted to introduce you to a couple of tools that are going to be helpful for you guys to use Navisworks, because without those kinds of tips, it's just a big giant model that you don't know how to navigate. Once we've got that set up, now we can get into the clash detection wizard. I already have a couple clashes set up, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new clash test. I'm going to go ahead and hit Add Test. I'm going to name it. I'm going to call this Level 1 Sanitary versus Structural Framing. One thing to keep in mind with structural framing for the non-structural engineers on the line, if you're doing structural framing in the first floor ceiling space and you're trying to make a rule for that, keep in mind that the framing in the first floor ceiling is actually associated to the reference level for level 2. I just want to point that out. I fought with that a little bit, not having the structural background. So just either don't make a rule for the structural framing and make your rule for other items such as the piping, or just keep in mind the framing is level 2 while the columns are actually level 1. And again, it gets confusing as far as what level it's referenced to. All right, so I named my clash, something appropriate, something that anybody can navigate. One thing I don't like is don't call it like, Nick's clash, I don't really like things with people's names because then people feel like they're not really allowed to use it. Whereas somebody might go in behind you and they might start filtering or sorting through these clashes, adding comments and things like that, which we'll do in a minute. So I created my clash run and I named it. And now I'm going to set up some rules. There is a rules tab, and you can do ignore clashes for, sanitary versus sanitary is the same layer or in the same file. I'm not too worried about that because of the way I did my selection. But under the select panel, I'm going to go to sets. And remember that first floor sanitary piping set I made? I can pick from that in that drop-down list. For selection B, it's going to be very similar to what I did on the Revit side. And I'm going to go ahead and choose the structural file. And in the structural file, you'll find the Revit categories are listed and sorted by level automatically. And it's really for any Revit model, not just structural. But I can see structural columns for level 1 and structural framing for level 2. And again, if you're trying to do the structural framing in the first floor, you actually want the second floor framing. In this case, since I only selected piping in the first floor, I can actually just run it against all the structural. It's only going to hit structural that's in the first floor ceiling space, so I don't really have to dive into these subcategories to find those. On the MEP side, I typically will turn off the self-intersecting. If you have self-intersecting turned on, what you'll end up getting back is a lot of duct fittings that are clashing with straight pieces of duct, and they're not really clashes, they're just touching each other. So I typically would turn off self-intersecting clashes. And if you're doing points or pad line work, you could do points and lines as well. But being a Revit model, we're taking Revit selection versus an entire Revit model. My clash type would be a hard clash, so 0.25, so as long as it's clashing better than 0, it's going to result in a clash. And at this point, we can just hit run test. When I hit run test, if you look in this window up here, it shows me I had 4 clashes, 4 of them are new. Later on, when I rerun the test, Ideally, any clashes that are resolved go into the resolved column. Any clashes that still exist but haven't been resolved, they'll be moved to the active column. And then any new clashes that maybe I created after I tried to fix some clashes, they would show up under the new column. And we'll look at those in the report here in a second. Okay, so I'm done in the results panel. See here. Oh, no, here we go. Cool. All right, so in the results panel, I kind of had it minimized. So here we have clash 1, clash 2, and as I click these clashes, it takes me to the view of that object. You don't have to hit the show button. And when you hit the show button, or when you click on it in this case, you can more easily see it because the colors are brighter and everything else becomes basically transparent. So that might be one advantage to Navisworks. When you click on an object in Navisworks, such as one of your clashing items, really you see all the same properties you see in Revit. So as far as the information that's available, there's no disadvantage to being in Navisworks. Okay. As I go through these clashes, one thing I like to do first, and this isn't really going to have a good effect because it's basically the same run of piping, but when I click on a clash here, this is a single piece of pipe. If this was one continuous length of pipe that was going through several beams, what I can actually do is expand this items flyout, and I can hit this button that says group clashes involving item. So again, if I had this one piece of pipe hitting 5 beams, I don't really need to go and searching for these other clashes. What I can do is hit the grouping button, and then I can say, you know, 4-inch span in corridor 101. And then, so what that did was it created a group with multiple clashes under it. Now again, that was only one piece of pipe, but that's really helpful for sorting your clashes and kind of putting them in a logical folder organization. And when we export these to say viewpoints, that will create a subfolder of those clashes. So again, what that does is it creates, you know, if there were 4 beams going through the same pipe, they would be grouped together under a single folder. Similarly, we can create groups. So if my clash report was a little bit more clustered than that, I can actually just manually select multiple clashes and hit new group. And then I can say corridor 101, all sanitary, which is similar to what I just did, but, and then again, that creates like a nice folder organization. After looking at the clash, I can add a comment. Like I say, move pipe to 11 feet - 8 inches. Let's pin this to keep the clash report opened. And then so that comment will show up under that clash. And let's go ahead and name that clash. Sanitary pipe, you know, below tall beam. There's a lot of different creative naming systems you might have. I'd be inclined to put in room names just to help people find it easier. When you're working with these clashes, if you want to add comments, you can. So kind of zoom in and you know, look at your clash, however you want to see it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the review panel. And then maybe I'll put a cloud around it if it wasn't clear. I can use the draw tools and put an arrow to it. And I can put a piece of text, move pipe to 11 foot - 8 inches. So you can add a lot of comments. When you add the comments, do it while you're in the clash report wizard. The reason for that is when I export all these clashes to HTML, which we'll get to in a few minutes, I want to see that comment in the HTML file. One mistake a lot of people do is what they'll do is they'll first save all their views as save viewpoints, which I'll do in a minute, and then they'll make their comments. But the problem with that is when you rerun your report and then you export those save viewpoints again, you've got to make all those same comments again if that clash still exists. So it's kind of frustrating. I don't recommend doing that. On top of making comments, you know, a digital comment or a comment that's visual, you can also assign it to a user or assign it to a person. Jana, move duct down or pipe down. I'll just keep picking on Jana. Later on, somebody from ImagineIt might go through and they might search out all the comments that are assigned to ImagineIt. And it'd be good to have a conversation with the contractor, structural engineer, architect, MEP engineer, and kind of make sure that the comments or the assigned to properties are going to be consistent so you can search those out. Because we can find comments using a find comments tool and then search for the name Jana, search for the name ImagineIt, and then track those down faster instead of having to sift through a lot of comments that may not be relevant to you. All right, so I just panned, and you'll notice that my comment disappeared. That's okay, because when I come back to it, the comment's still there. I didn't really update the view, but I just wanted to show you as you're navigating, the comment is still there. Again, for a non-Revit user, it might be confusing that your comments disappear once you change your viewpoint. So these are viewpoints, and the text only exists in this viewpoint. Once you start moving your camera, you're no longer in that viewpoint, which is why your comments disappear. Make sure you like your viewpoint before you save it. Okay. Let's go ahead and search out one of these. So I'm going to click on this pipe because that's the file I have open. It's just going to be easier for me to do. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for the element ID. So we have an element ID tab in the properties. And then I'll right-click on it, copy value, go back to Revit, select by ID, paste, hit show, and then it locates that pipe. There's another tool inside of Navisworks called the switchback tool. For me, my preference is the search by ID, but I'll go ahead and show you the switchback tool anyway. If you want to use what's called the switchback tool, you're going to have to go to, let's see if I can find it quickly, Add-ins, External Tools, Navisworks Switchback. When you click on that, nothing really happens. All it does is it initiates the ability for that tool to function with this file. If you're working with an AutoCAD file, the command to initiate the switchback tool between Navisworks and AutoCAD is called nwload. So all you would do is you would type nwload in the command line in AutoCAD, hit enter, and then it would initiate that tool to function. Once we've done that, let's go to another clash. I can click on an object, and then I can right-click, and then hit switchback. Now again, this is not my tool of preference, but it is a handy tool, and I know a lot of people like it. And let's see, there, run. It might be a little bit slow. I'm a very impatient person. Try one more time, and then we'll move on. Okay, we'll move on. Oh, there it is. Okay. Sorry, I told you I was an impatient person. All right, so what that did was it generated a 3D view of the object you had highlighted. Again, the reason I don't really like this tool is because I don't usually like what's in the view. If the walls were transparent, then I would see it. But the object is selected, and I do have my 3D view open that I like. So if I deliberately have the 3D view open, it'll generate that camera view, and I'll just hit Control-Tab, and I'll cycle back to my 3D view. When I came to that view, it was highlighted a second ago before I clicked. So that's how I typically use the tool. Again, for me, it's just as easy to do a search by ID and just be in the view I want to see it in to begin with. Typically, when I run my clashes, I know what area I'm working in or what floor I'm working in. So I have these nice 3D plenum views where I can see it, and then I might have a plan view as well where I expect to see that object too. Okay. So it took a couple seconds, but it did work. So I just right-click on the object and hit switchback, and that was after I initiated the switchback tool inside of Revit or AutoCAD. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the reporting tools. So if I click on the Report tab, I can choose what properties I want to report. So let's see, a summary, that's fine. Date found, that's good. Assigned to, yes. If somebody approved it, it would tell you when it was approved by. But for me, if it was approved, I'm not really exporting that data anyway. So I'm going to exclude that from my report because there's nothing that's going to be approved because it's excluded from this column. Layer name, which will be sanitary versus return versus structural framing. Element ID, comments. You know, I think I'll keep all the rest of this stuff. I'm not really doing a simulation, so I can actually uncheck the date in the event. If I was tying my clashes into a timeliner, which we're not going to have time for, I would keep that on as well. And clash group, again, is my logical grouping of that clash. All right. So there are two ways that I like to export my clashes. The first one is as viewpoints. So I'm going to choose as viewpoints. And then preserve highlighting, which again, that makes everything else translucent. And then one object is in green, one is in red. So that's what preserve highlighting will mean. And then I'm going to hit write report. Before I hit write report, look at my save viewpoints list. So all I have are a couple of my core views that I like to start with. So 2 plenum views, or a plenum view for each level, then a plenum view for an isolated area, and then an overall view of the building, but no level 1 sanitary yet. So I'm going to hit write report. And now you have level 1 sanitary versus structural. And if you had some logical grouping, again, items would be grouped together in a nice order that kind of helps you identify, hey, these are all the same clash really. They all get resolved at the same time. So you don't have to keep looking at different clashes that are already resolved. That makes that nice folder structure. When you name your clash, so remember I named this one clash, sanitary pipe below tall beam, 4-inch sanitary in corridor 101. That naming comes into your save view inside of Navisworks. Again, I don't like to mark up in save viewpoints. So remember my clouding and doing all my text notes? I don't want to do it in save viewpoints because next time I run my clash report and export my viewports, I'm going to have to remark all these views up versus having all those markups saved in the view, in the clash report view. Next time I export it, I'll have those same comments again. I don't have to remark it up. So don't do your comments in these save viewpoints, not for clash reports at least, because these are really an export. They're really one way, and they're for the benefit of somebody who maybe doesn't have Navisworks managed, and they're just going to be viewing the clash report or the clash comments that you want to send them. Anybody with Navisworks Simulate or Manage can navigate these views. I had a slide for it, but I don't want to go back to the PowerPoint. So there's 3 versions of Navisworks. There's Navisworks Freedom, Navisworks Simulate, and Navisworks Manage. Navisworks Freedom is a free viewer, and somebody with Navisworks Freedom would be able to navigate these views in my comments. They would not have the Clash Detective wizard, and they would not be able to create new views. So all they can do is navigate. Somebody with Navisworks Simulate, they don't have the Clash Detection wizard again, but they can create views, they can add comments to your saved viewpoints, and things like that. And Navisworks Manage has the Clash Detection wizard versus the other ones don't have that at all. And that's what the biggest difference is. Navisworks Manage comes with a license of Building Design Suite Ultimate. Navisworks Simulate comes with a license of Building Design Suite Simulate, Premium, I'm sorry. Okay. We can export these views. So I right-click on my folder of sanitary versus structural views, and I can export viewpoints report. And then I'm going to make a folder for this. Level 1, and there's structural. I don't often do this, but I just want to show you what's there. And then I'm going to save that out. And let's open that folder up. Oops, wrong folder. So when I exported that, you'll see that each view is saved out as a JPEG, which you can open with, you know, any image viewer. Then we also have an HTML file, and then that also has those JPEGs and whatever naming that I decided to include. So it's not a full report. You know, any comments I had would show up here as well. So you're seeing some of the comments and other summary properties I wanted to export. But I don't do this very often, but maybe for somebody who doesn't have Navisworks Manage that only receives saved viewpoints, if they want to save it out to HTML, which they can again open in Excel, they can do that by right-clicking and exporting that. All right, let's go back to the Clash Report wizard and let's do a real HTML export. So I have a report. Let's see. That's fine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose HTML Tabular this time. Not HTML, HTML Tabular. It's a big difference, so always remember to use the tabular format. It set the current test, and my current test is my sanitary report. I could hit this drop down, I could do all tests. Maybe I ran different clash tests against different piping for the first floor, and that's all that was in this file. I could do all tests separate. Very often people have separate Navisworks files. They might have one Navisworks file for level 1, another one for level 2, or they might have different Navisworks files for different types of clashes. That way more than one person can do clash reporting at the same time. So one person could be doing, piping against structural, another person could be doing structural against, walls or ceilings. So you might have separate Navisworks files. But in this case, I'm only going to do the current test because all I want is structural versus sanitary. HTML Tabular, Revit report. So I'm going to put it in my clash reports folder. I could date it if I wanted to, or I could just hit OK. And again, I like to open up Excel. Go to my clash reports folder. And then I'm going to find my level 1 sanitary versus structural framing, hit open. And then this is a fully editable Excel file, so maybe I'd want to put my Imagine It logo in there or something. I'd want to resave this. Again, I don't like to keep it as an HTML file, it's just a preference. So I save it as an Excel file. But then I might go through and say, you know what, I'm going to send this report to Imagine It. So maybe I only need the rows that are relevant for Imagine It, and I can delete rows in this report. Or if I was at Imagine It, as I start resolving these items, not being the Navisworks user, I might do my own tracking and, just turn this green or something like that just to identify that that's complete. Then I can add my own comments to the side. This is fully editable in Excel. You can click on the images. Actually, let me click on the image that has a comment. All right, didn't like that. Not finding my my image viewer. But when you click on that, it should have popped up with a larger version of the clash image. And then from this point, if I had received this report being a non-Navisworks user, I do have the element ID. Copy to clipboard by hitting Control-C. Go into Revit. And then hopefully knowing that it's first floor clashes, I would just have a 3D view of the entire floor plan. Maybe I'll just extend this out. Can't remember what part of the building I'm on. Oh, okay. I got rotated around too much. So maybe knowing it's on the first floor but not knowing the area it's in, I'll just extend my 3D view to include the entire first floor, where I can easily see the clashes and I can easily see other disciplines, versus just a plumbing plan, I might only see plumbing. I don't even know what it's clashing against. That's why I like these views. So I'll go Manage, Select by ID, Control-V, hit Show. All right, fantastic. All right, try another one. What can I see in here? Let's do, oh, okay. So I had done the structural, which isn't even in that file. I want to actually do the element ID for the pipe. That's by ID. There it is. So it's highlighted there in pink. That's what my selection is set to. And then I would go through and I would resolve these clashes. Now I had already resolved the clash. And so all I would have to do is I would have to save this file once I resolve the clash. And maybe I'll create a new clash while I'm at it, just to show you what that looks like in the report. And let's set this to maybe 13.6. There I go. I created a new clash just to show you what it looks like in the report. But I resolved all the other clashes because it's actually the same run of piping. But I'm going to go ahead and save my Revit model. All right, maybe I should have done close all views, but fine. go back to Navisworks, and because I appended my Revit models, I actually don't have to export again. All I have to do is hit refresh. This might take a minute, but while that's refreshing, I'll just kind of talk about my preference for how to bring in the Revit models. I typically bring in the entire Revit model. Other people typically do, a selection from a 3D view and export to Navisworks as an NWC file. The problem with that is every time you want to refresh your Navisworks model, you've got to go to Revit. You have to find that 3D view or recreate that selection again and then re-export it. It's very time-consuming to do that. And while my refreshing of the file right now isn't very fast, I can go in, I can check my email, I can do other work basically while this is refreshing, or go get coffee or something. But there's no manual effort. I just click refresh, and then I go do something else. So again, it's not the fastest way as far as reloading your content, but it's the least labor intensive, I guess is the best way to put it. All right. There we go. All right, so that reloaded. Another thing, just since I have the time for it, under your Navisworks options, there's a file readers area. Go down to Revit, and then you're going to make sure that this is set up the way you want. That way your Revit import comes in correctly. I do want the element IDs to make sure that's checked. The coordinates are project internal, or if you're using shared coordinate system in your Revit model, you'd set it to shared. Let's see, what else? Convert URLs is fine. Where's my link? I don't like to bring in all the link files together. I like to bring them in separately. So I usually uncheck that. But more importantly, this drop down right here, convert Navis view, first 3D view or entire project. I will set this to be the entire project. Again, everybody has different preferences, so there might be some people that don't agree with me. But let's just talk about what these options mean. If you do convert Navis view, it looks for any view that begins with the word Navis. Any 3D view that begins with the word Navis, it's not that that view is exported, it's that only elements in that view are exported. If it's set the first 3D view, and your first 3D view has nothing in it, you're not going to get anything inside of Navisworks. So again, it's not that it's importing these views, it's only importing geometry that show up on those views, which you can use to your advantage if you want to do that. But for me, it's just simpler to do entire projects. I don't have to kill myself setting up different views to have different things filtered out. Because, using the appearance profiler and search sets, I can do filters inside of Navisworks. So again, people typically do specific views, but they don't know how to use the Navisworks filters. So again, I can do a filter for non-interior walls. I can do a filter for pipes larger than 1 inch. I can do filters for a lot of different things. So, but that was under your Navisworks options, and if your Revit model isn't coming in, it's probably because one of these is not set correctly. Probably most likely it's the conversion option. So I refreshed my file, and now I'm going to go back to my clash detection wizard and find my clash report, and let's see. I'm going to rerun it. So I just hit update all, and it doesn't look like it really refreshed the file correctly. I was expecting another new clash in there, but it didn't show up. But you will notice that all the new clashes went to active. I don't think the file refreshed. I might just need to close the file, but the resolved clashes should show up in the resolved column, and any approved clashes, you can mark them as approved. Although my there we go. Where the heck am I? Sorry, I can't see everything, so approved by, approved. Yeah, anyway, once it's marked as approved, it'll show up in the green approved column. And again, things that are resolved and approved, I typically will not export in a report, so that'll filter them out of your next report or your next export to save viewpoint. Okay. We have a little bit of time left, so I want to open that up to any questions that people might have, and Jen is going to field those for me.
Yeah, one moment while I end today's recording.